Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me here to Astana, or Nur Sultan. So this is me. I teach at UC Berkeley. I teach in the business school. I also teach in the law school and the engineering school. I did most of my training at the Wharton Business School and some other schools. And these are some companies that I've done some work with in the last couple years. And I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about disruption today. I'm going to talk about disruption of the education business model. A lot of us, when we think about disruption, we're focused on technology. And we think that technology is the source of the disruption. As a student of business and technology, I think it's far more important for us to acknowledge that the disruptions that take place in our world are primarily due to changes in the business models, changes in the way we organize our activities, the ways in which we organize our entities, our corporations, and our markets. And it's only after we disrupt those things that the technology is able to flourish. And so when I think about EdTech, I'm thinking about how will technology be enabled within the education sector, and the only way it will be enabled is through disruption of the business model. Now, why would someone at a top 10 university like Berkeley care about disruption? Because after all, we are safe. We don't have to worry about competition. We are a top 10 university. We have 22 Nobel laureates. We are the #1 research university in America. We have special parking spots just for our Nobel laureates, right? We are the #2 school for startups. We are the #1 school for tech CEOs. We're #6 in the world, #5 in the world, right? #7 in the world. Our business school is #10 in the world. And I want to say, in fact, we need to be scared, just like every other school. So I teach strategy, and when I start my strategy class, I use this story here. This is a picture of some ancient Greeks who were fighting off these animals. They were fighting off what they think of as the barbarians. Now in business, and I think of education as a business, we are also continually fighting off the forces that are trying to destroy what it is that we do. And to give you an example, if we look at the United States, the top businesses in the 1890s, what do we see? We see railroads, 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 railroads. Well, where are the railroads now? I had to go back and look in 2012 to find a railroad among the top 50 companies in the United States. The railroad industry has disappeared as a significant contributor to the US economy. When we look at how long companies will last on our top listed stock exchanges, we see that it used to be that a company could last 40 years. Now a company only lasts 15 years. And so what about a university that's 150 years old, like Berkeley, or a 400-year-old university, or Cambridge and Oxford, Harvard, and so forth? Won't they last forever? Well, I think they're in serious danger of being undermined, and it's because of the way in which the managers and the administrators, the faculty, tend to think. They tend to think in terms of incremental improvements. So the metaphor that I use in my business classes and my engineering classes, and I think you'll understand this, is that of a simple hill climber, right? So this metaphor you may be familiar with. It's about, if you're trying to get to the highest point, in business we think of the highest point as the most profitable or the most productive. If we think of this metaphorically, if you're trying to get to the highest point, say on Mars, with one of these little rovers, the simple way to do it would be to simply have this rover always go uphill. Okay, always go uphill and you should get to the top, right? Well, wrong. That only works in a world like this. And yet this is the mindset that most people have about business and about education and about business models. They think that if they make these small incremental improvements on the margin, they will always be able to get to the top. They'll always be able to become a better business. okay? The problem is that the world looks like this, right? And if you just always go uphill, you will probably get trapped at some local maximum, some local peak. And the machine learning people know what I'm talking about, okay? And so just to give you some examples from business, this is Netflix. Now Netflix, you could see, was doing really well, and then in 2011, they made a major shift in their business, right? They made a major shift in their business, which was to abandon the CD distribution. Okay, now, why was this so important? Well, if you go back here and you look at a business that's stuck at the point A, the only way to get from A to B is to go downhill and then go back uphill. And this is something that managers don't like to do, right? They don't like to go through the wrenching pain of going downhill. And yet, when Netflix abandoned what they had become really good at, what happened was the stock price collapsed and the managers were in trouble. But luckily, because they foresaw this change to streaming, the stock price has since climbed. They had the courage to let the stock go down before it went back up. Okay? Some other examples. Adobe. Adobe used to sell software which was on-premise, right? And they were the best at what they did. They had to go through a very wrenching change, which was to move to cloud, okay? And when they moved to the cloud, this was extremely painful. The managers were given a lot of flack. The stock price suffered. But now, of course, Adobe is one of the most valuable companies in the world. Adobe and Autodesk had to do the same thing. So again, this is a business model shift from a product model to a service model, from an on-prem software model to a cloud-based software model. It's not a change in technology, it's a change in business model and how you deliver your product, right? You deliver it as a service, you deliver it through a subscription, okay? And so how do we then make sure we get to the top of the next peak, especially when this peak is moving, right? Well, we need to have some sensitivity to the environment, and we need to have some agility baked into our business model. Now, in an evolutionary world, all you have to do is break up what you do into little bits and pieces and allow those bits and pieces to morph and evolve as the landscape shifts. Okay, so if you've studied evolution, you understand how this works, right? Charles Darwin talked about it, right? The shift in the population, it moves as the environment moves. If the environment moves very slowly, this is a perfectly fine model. But when the environment has radical disruptions, this model is not going to be sufficient, okay? And so, we like to talk about evolution, especially in IT, and what we're seeing, of course, in IT is a move right away from on-prem IT to completely cloud-based software as a service. So whether we're talking about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service, it's all about moving things into the cloud and a different business model for what we're consuming, which then becomes a different business model for what we're producing. Now, the problem with a lot of companies and a lot of educational institutions is that they've been in a very stable environment for a really long time. As we learned in other sessions, education today is not that much different from education, 400 years ago, right? You have a professor sitting at a podium. Okay, maybe we've got some PowerPoint instead of a blackboard. And when the environment is stable, all those evolutionary mutations that are supposed to drive evolution, they dry up. They become too expensive. They become luxuries. And so these institutions which are best at what they do are often the ones that are least able to change, okay? Because they focus on their core competency. And what is the core competency of a business school today? It's all about horseshoe-shaped classrooms, case study method, professor at the center, okay? All the stuff that's been perfected. And so sticking to your core competency may sound like a good business, but it's actually a terrible business in this world. There's always the trade-off in business and in algorithms between explore and exploit. How much effort managerial do you spend on doing what you do now better and maximizing what you're currently doing, and how much effort do you spend on exploring new options? Okay, so do you send out shoots and branches? Do you explore other alternatives? Well, if it's a stable world, this is not a good strategy. In an unstable world, you have to do this. So if you spend all of your time focusing on exploit, then ultimately, right, you will die. Okay, and so how do these educational institutions think outside of their traditional business model? Well, we could look for inspiration of what not to do by looking at businesses like Borders. Okay, Borders stuck to its core competency. Borders did a really, really good job at selling books, and they're gone. Blockbuster did a really, really good job of renting movies on-prem, and they're gone. Toys R Us recently went bankrupt. They were really good at what they did, and they stuck to their core competencies. Other companies, a long list. So what we need to remember is that, and this is a famous quote, right? People don't buy drills, they buy holes. Okay? We think people are buying degrees and diplomas and majors. They're not. They're buying skills. They're buying capabilities. And universities have to think about how to deliver those capabilities. Okay? So what's happening in the labor market today is that rather than buying some education and then amortizing it for 40 years on some long-term job, right, people are amortizing their education in a year, in 2 years, because the skills that you need are continually changing. These are statistics about workplace turnover in the United States. At least in the Bay Area, the average life expectancy of an employee is about 1.5 years. Okay? People switch jobs. My students come in at age 27 with 5 jobs under their belt, okay, at 5 different companies. This means that they need to learn new skills continuously in real time. And so what are the things that are happening in education business model-wise? Well, we're moving more and more into continuous learning, lifelong learning, executive education, right? Corporate training. This is becoming a huge market. It's going to dominate, right, the young adult market at some level, perhaps. We know about the MOOCs, right? I don't need to tell you about the MOOCs and what the MOOCs are doing, what companies like LinkedIn are doing, right? This is growing rapidly, these MOOCs. Although, even though the MOOCs are rapidly growing, people are complaining about the MOOCs. The MOOCs don't deliver, right, a lot of the things that people want that they currently get out of the classroom. And so universities will often look down their nose at the MOOCs and say, well, yeah, we're still better than the MOOCs. And yet, there are places like Georgia Tech, which have mastered an online degree program, which costs a tiny fraction of the bricks and mortar degree program, and it's just as effective, cranking out people that are just as good at their jobs. It's a radical transformation of education. And then there are companies like this that do remote learning in classrooms all around the world. Okay? And then most importantly, in the Bay Area at least, we see boot camps. These are companies like General Assembly and Galvanize and Flatiron School. These companies have sprung out of nowhere, and they're growing like crazy, and they're merging and selling for hundreds of millions of dollars. I sent my nephew to General Assembly for a 30-hour course, and he tripled his salary. Okay, so how can you triple your salary with 30 hours of content? You go to one of these schools, okay? They're doing a better job than the universities. So what can the universities do? I think they can take lessons from the most innovative companies out there, right? Like Amazon, like Google, and break up their businesses into smaller components, right? Think about the Lego brick model. Think about the composability of a large-scale tech firm and apply that to the universities. Right? And what I mean by that, I don't mean this kind of Lego. This is the kind of Lego that my nephew has. These are not Legos. I don't like these Legos. This is the wrong kind of Lego, right? This is based on the idea that you have to build a business model where every single part fits together. Okay, this model is built on the idea that, as soon as you build a part, you don't know what it's going to be used for in the future. Okay, and so, sometimes we refer to this as agile, right? There's lots of different words for it, but the idea is to move away from these monumental enterprises towards things that are able to move more quickly. Okay, so just to give you an example, and I'll just give a few more minutes. In the old days, when you bought a car and you wanted to update your car and add a new feature of your car, you had to buy a new car, right? If you want anti-lock brakes, you got to buy a new car. If you want power windows, you got to buy a new car, right? You want a bigger engine, you got to buy a new car. Now, if you want a new feature on your car, you just download it. Okay, so what the car companies have done, like Tesla, is they've moved from long release cycles, like year-long release cycles, to daily release cycles. Okay, how can we give our students the ability to update their education daily rather than every 4 years? Okay, this is where we have to go, and ultimately I think that universities have to become like platforms, right, and build out ecosystems, right, where you go to a university, you get an operating system from that university, maybe. The university gives you some native apps, but then ultimately you're going to continue to update those apps, and you're maybe even going to get some third-party apps that work within the operating system of your university. Okay, this is an entirely different business model. And so at my school, which is the Haas School of Business, right, we're thinking about what's called Haas as a service. Okay, so this is an idea where instead of coming to our university to get a degree, to get a diploma, you can tap into our university at will, right? Like AWS, right? Like the water in your faucet, like the electricity in your wall. You can access it when and where you need it, how you need it, for what you need it. Okay, this is a radically different business model, and it's one that's almost impossible to implement at a legacy institution because of the silos and because of the administrative frictions and so forth. And so I'll just end with this one warning, and that one warning is, if you don't know where your blind spot is, then you're in trouble. Everyone has a blind spot. Every company, every institution, every industry has competitors that are lying in wait, ready to put them out of business. Okay, and so we have these great examples of people who didn't know their blind spots. The most common blind spot is believing that others have them and you don't. So even Amazon has, even Jeff Bezos has said that Amazon will go out of business. Okay, I doubt that the president of Harvard or the chancellor of Berkeley has acknowledged that they may go out of business. But you have to acknowledge that possibility if you want to stay in business. Because ultimately, everything winds up like this, okay? Where are the ancient Greek universities? They've disappeared. And so we need to always worry about disruption. And so we need to teach people how to learn, and we need to teach them how to learn to learn. That's what we're thinking about. We're aware of this. We're planning for it. And that's a huge part of what keeps all of us up at night at a top 10 university like Berkeley. Thank you very much.